Hi everyone, Anne O'Connell with OC Publishing here, and welcome to the author journey. Today's show is, I've been waiting to do this for a while. I'm really excited about this. We're going to be talking about this book, Isn't It Gorgeous? An Atlas of Endangered Alphabets by Tim Brookes. And Tim is our guest today, and this has been a labor of love for him for a really long time. I'll let him tell you a little bit more about that. But this particular book that just recently came out, it's a global exploration of the many writing systems that are on the verge of vanishing and the stories and cultures that carry them. It occurred to me that the very essence of this discussion today is what has brought us books and authors, because without writing systems, there would be no books. So think about that just for a minute. This atlas is about those writing systems and the people who are trying to save them. From the ancient holy alphabets of the Middle East, now used only by tiny sects, to the newly created African alphabets designed to keep cultural traditions alive in the 21st century. From a Sudanese script based on the ownership marks traditionally branded into camels, to the secret system used in one corner of China exclusively by women to record the songs and stories of their inner selves. This unique book profiles dozens of scripts. It's brilliant. It just sucks you right in when you pick it up, and the cultures they encapsulate, offering glimpses of worlds unknown to us and ways of saving them from vanishing entirely. The author, Tim Brookes, who was with us today, was born in London and educated at Oxford before moving to the United States in 1980. He worked as a football coach, a guitarist, and a tour guide before embarking on a writing career that has included 18 books, more than 1,000 articles, let that sink in a minute, and essays, reviews, and humor pieces, and a 21-year stint as a regular commentator for National Public Radio. He founded the nonprofit Endangered Alphabets Project in 2010, which I've been following and supporting ever since. And since then, he has exhibited his Endangered Alphabets carvings, which are brilliant. We maybe have a chance to look at those, and spoken about script loss at more than 150 colleges, universities, libraries, museums, and galleries, including Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, Yale, and the Smithsonian Institute, the Library of Congress, and now on the author journey. So we're very happy to welcome Tim back to the author journey.
I am so glad to be here. What a wonderful introduction. Thanks so much.
Oh, you're very welcome. And we're just totally thrilled to have you back, because there's been a lot going on since it might be at least a year ago, if not more, since you joined us. And this just became available in the US, last week?
Yes. Yep.
So this beautiful copy, like I said, I have been turning from page to page and just looking at some of these amazing scripts that it's mind-boggling. I mean, I've lived, all over the world, and, have studied Spanish and Thai, a little bit of Arabic. So this is the kind of thing that just gets me totally jazzed. So I'm really excited to dive into this. So how does it feel? Like, this has been a long time coming, Tim.
Yes. And in fact, it's a strange journey because the whole idea of an atlas started around 2018, at which point I had been doing the endangered alphabets for about 9 years. And what would happen is I would do these exhibitions of my carvings and give talks, and people would be just fascinated, and they would say, where can we find out more about this? And I would say there isn't anywhere. There is everything that I discovered was like on a one-by-one basis. I'm like a bird flying off and coming back with one twig. And
that takes a long time to build a nest that way.
Yes,
Tim.
Exactly. And out of that, I created this online atlas, which went live January 2019, and continued to research, because in that first edition of the online atlas, I think we had something like 100 scripts. So that got updated at the very beginning of this year, 2024, when I had my first ever World Endangered Writing Day that I created back in January.
Right. If people can get there, let me just bring up that site as just to show people there. Yeah,
great.
Go ahead.
So then I added another 200 scripts, and there are more out there, you know. And I was contacted by a book publisher saying, you know, we should do a book version of your atlas. And that was right before COVID. And of course, everything got thrown upside down. And so by a weird twist, the first book, the atlas, out of which everything else grew, actually got published a year later than my second book, which is called Writing Beyond Writing, that came out a year ago. But they're both out there now, and I'm about to start working on my third. It's going to be a trilogy. So the whole thing, a writer's journey, yeah, I would say so.
Oh, for sure. And I brought this up because this statistic is pretty incredible. Of the world's 6,000 to 7,000 languages, half will be extinct by the end of this century. 85% of the world's alphabets are endangered. And I made a comment in the opening that, you know, without writing systems, there are no books. But there's a lot more that is connected to a writing system. So talk a little bit about that. And it's not just happening like on the other side of the world. Like every single continent, when I was looking through the atlas, every single continent is impacted. So, but what are the real dire circumstances?
Right. First of all, everybody has heard of endangered languages, and they recognize that's an issue. That's actually remarkably new. That whole endangered languages movement began actually about 30 years ago. But in that time, people started realizing this is important, that languages are important to their cultures in ways that are far more interesting and subtle than you might realize. It's not just a question of, oh, give up that language, speak another one. And of course, there are programs in documentation and teaching and revitalization of languages. But the attention of linguists has been directed exclusively to spoken languages for a variety of historical reasons. And so when I started the Endangered Alphabets Project, David Crystal, who is like the number one guy in languages in the English-speaking world, said, you know, you're the only person I know who is looking at endangered scripts. And he was kind enough to write the introduction to my first book. So the dire circumstances, let's talk about two things that go together. One is, what are the dire circumstances? And the other is, why is it important when a culture has its own script?
Right.
Because there are, just as there are people who say, wouldn't it be more convenient if the whole world spoke English, you know, or whatever their particular language is.
For those of us who only speak English, maybe.
Yes, exactly. And that's even more true of the Latin alphabet that we use, because that is used either as a primary or secondary script by more people than all the other scripts in the world put together. It is the bully alphabet. And a great illustration of that is the Spanish, you know, in the 16th century, they go to Central and South America, and even though there are flourishing civilizations there that are in many ways very sophisticated, the Spanish regard them and their writing as pagan. And so not only do you have the destruction of temples, for example, and sort of social infrastructure, but you have the very deliberate burning of codices, of books that were in the Mayan script. So usually the dire circumstance you're talking about is one culture wanting to impose its will on the other. It may be by invasion, it may be by military means, it may be by economic means. For various reasons, a culture that had its own history, its own independence, its own self-determination, its own language, and its own form of writing, is now pressured to varying degrees to give that up.
Like our indigenous peoples. I mean, that's
absolutely, yeah,
huge. Like in Canada with reconciliation and all that kind of thing. And one of the things that you mentioned was that the writing is the literal shaping of thought.
Yes.
Right. So you can share, like there's lots of oral storytelling, but it's when there's a writing system that those thoughts get, changed from something abstract into something concrete.
Yes, this is something that the field of linguistics has tended to not look at. In fact, the definition of writing has been, it's just a way to represent the sounds of speech. It's a secondary artifact. But what I've discovered in all of my sort of virtual adventures, I wish I'd been to all these places, but I haven't, is that
on the list
is that the writing as a whole, or individual letters even, have an iconic quality that we don't understand because ours doesn't. Ours is so widely used that whether you're in Canada or here in the United States or in Brittany or in Catalonia, you're still using the same alphabet. We understand the importance of spoken language to culture, but what about the written language? And so there are a number of places around the world where the script has become so endangered, yes, lovely, that people by and large can no longer read and write it, but it is still revered. There is a particular form of writing that is in the state seal of Mongolia. It's actually the heart of the seal. It's a writing system called 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐬. And nobody reads and writes 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐫, but everybody knows that character. It stands for who we are. And in some cases, it stands for who we were when we were somebody. So the great example of that actually is the Irish script 𝐬𝐻M or 𝐬𝐻M, which was being used 1,000 years ago and which hasn't even been fully deciphered. But it means a great deal to the Irish because it represents who they were before the advent of Christianity, before the bloody English came in. It is, it's a sign that we were somebody. The 𝐼𝐻𝐺𝐴 people in North Africa, when they discovered stele, stones engraved with their script that were 2,000 years old, it was like, yes, we were here all along.
Wow. And that's incredible. And, it's kind of cool. One of the things that jumped out at me when I was reading through was some of the more like contemporary references. Like there was a Star Trek reference.
Yes.
For the Senegal language, 𝐵𝐺.
Yeah.
And in Star Trek Discovery, like, that's kind of cool. So obviously they did the research, right?
Yes, and also in Wakandan, in the Black Panther. Yes, so there's actually, it's very interesting in the science fiction fantasy community, because they are building alternative worlds. Many of the authors recognize that in those alternative worlds, people are going to speak alternative languages and are going to have alternative scripts. So there's actually this extraordinary boom going on in artificial script creation, for novels or for TV or for movies. And in some cases, it draws on existing traditions, such as the ones you mentioned. And in some cases, and also games as well. Games are very, very big in this respect. And in some cases, people make up their own scripts from scratch. I should stress that my own particular self-appointed work doesn't include that, because for me, the really important thing is human rights and social justice, and the fact that I'm trying to help cultures that if they have an endangered alphabet, they are an endangered culture. They are, in some sense, they may have lost their land rights. They may have lost the rights to claim their own history. They may have lost voting rights. And it's all really part of that whole kind of cultural renewal and rediscovery of equality and respect.
And that, I mean, that was something that was a little reassuring, that you talked about some of these languages that are making a resurgence. So, I mean, talk about how does that happen? You know, there are champions of different languages and, you know, some that you've sort of come across. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So the most extreme example of this is just a great illustration of how things go bad and what it takes to recover them. So in the 18th century, in northeastern India, in the area which is now the state of Manipur, there was a script in use called 𝐬𝐻𝐫𝐸𝐻𝐫𝐸. And it was a really interesting script that, like many, especially in South Asia, had a very strong sacred component. So each letter corresponded to a body part of the deity that was at the heart of their religion. Wow. And so again, this is just an illustration of how much a script can mean to a people, that it's actually part of their relationship with the divine and with the immaterial world, etc. So a sort of a traveling Hindu preacher came through that region and converted the king to Hinduism. And so that means that all of this previous religion stuff now needs to be stamped out, because again, it becomes regarded as heretical. And so there was a ritual day of burning of the documents and manuscripts and books. And in fact, that day, which is traditionally observed on the 23rd of January, is the reason why my World Endangered Writing Day is on January the 23rd. Okay. So it seems unlikely that absolutely every manuscript was destroyed, but the vast majority of them were, and the Devanagari script was used for them for 200 years. And then in the 1970s, there starts to be this cultural renewal movement, and people start saying we should bring that script back because that's who we really are, or who we really were. And they actually engaged in kind of guerrilla warfare and various acts of civil disobedience. That's how much it took. And eventually they started getting taken seriously. And it was realized that if they were going to reintroduce that script, they needed to add a couple more letters because the spoken language had actually changed somewhat. And now it is one of the official languages of the state of Manipur. It's this extraordinary story of like death and rebirth.
Wow, that's incredible. Wasn't there a Sudanese language that's sort of having a rebirth?
Sundanese. Yes, there's an extra N in there. Sudanese is so Sunda is the sort of western half of the island of Java in Indonesia. And yes, starting they had a script called what is now called Old Sundanese, which was being used up until about 1650, and because of a series of kind of incursions. So you have the arrival of Islam, which means that the language then gets written with the Arabic script for a while. Then you also have the Dutch coming in. So the whole thing is, you know, it's sort of one incursion after another. And eventually in the 1990s, the governor of Sunda, the Sunda province, said, we want to have our own alphabet. We want to have our own script. And they did a lot of research and a lot of polling, you know, which should we use? And people came out in favor of reviving this script that hadn't been used for 300 years. Wow. And their attitude was, this is evidence that we precede everything that came after. And this is, in a sense, the kind of root of who we are. Wow. And so Sundanese is now, it's been digitized. There is a Sundanese Wikipedia page written
I love it.
in the Sundanese language using the Sundanese script, which is a fascinating script. Every letter looks like a variation on the number 7, or a combination of sevens, or sevens with lines.
Wow.
And that's because that shape worked particularly well when you imprinting on a palm leaf with a
Right.
stylus.
Wonder
It
if I could
didn't
easily
damage the
find
leaf
it.
too much.
Wonder if I could. Okay. Oh, look at this page I opened too. What is
Yes, that's something else altogether.
Oh,
So
explain.
right, okay. So
I know I'm jumping somewhere else. I
no,
was
that's fine. I'm
opening
just
to see if I could find Sudanese, Sundanese. But
Yeah. No, I'm just gathering my thoughts. So one of the reasons why my second book is called Writing Beyond Writing is that it became, the more I looked at all these scripts, the more it became clear that our notion of what writing is basically just describes our understanding of writing and our writing practices. So that thing you're holding up there, it really is based on the assumption that if you take a thought or an idea, which is something immaterial and invisible and intangible, and you make a mark, you're moving from the immaterial world into the material world.
Wow.
And so there's a number of cultures where a letter or a mark or a diagram or a symbol is actually a way of bridging the gap between the immaterial world and the material world, or the divine world and the human world. And so those particular symbols you were showing are called firmas, and they were developed in, roughly speaking, in the region of the Congo, and then they crossed the Atlantic into Cuba, and they're part of religious ceremonies. And this is another thing that we don't realize. We think of writing as being kind of a tangible product. But in many places, writing is actually more of an act and part of a performance or a celebration. And so the act of writing these symbols is actually an act of drawing on and revealing spiritual energy.
Wow.
And the symbols all have various meanings, and typically they're not used by ordinary people. They're used specifically by practitioners, ritual practitioners, as a way of gathering spiritual energy or force to a particular time and place for a particular purpose.
And do those things become constant? Like once like an image is sort of spiritually brought to the foreground, does that image continue, or like that icon?
Great question. Excellent question. As I understand it, and I'm as deep as a puddle on some of these things.
No.
There are certain standard symbols that refer to or beckon or explicate certain ideas or certain forces. But equally, individual practitioners will then use them in their own ways. And they will typically, and this is very common, they will typically only teach that to a disciple, a student, an acolyte. And so there are a number of these scripts, these shamanic scripts, which are endangered simply because the next generation doesn't want to learn and become part of that that process of cultural transmission and spiritual transmission.
Interesting. Well, I want to say hi to those who are watching us. We have one of my favorite people, Lana Shoup, who's an author in Calgary, and she spends some time in Nova Scotia as well. And she says she's number 3 in line for this book at the local library in Calgary. So, yay!
Well, I'm glad there are 3 people who are interested in reading it.
Well, there might be lots more after her, right?
Yes, yes.
So you're making inroads in Canada. So
Yep.
Something occurred to me as we were chatting about these symbols and the images. Is there any relation to hieroglyphics?
So the term hieroglyphics just refers to a certain way of creating meaning through symbols. That you could say, are they related to Egyptian hieroglyphics?
Okay.
And there is the transmission of culture, high culture, has been defined in our society by Europeans and by people whose stake in it was to say we are the greatest in the world, and it's because we are the inheritors of this great legacy which goes from Egypt and Greece and Rome and all this kind of thing. And consequently, it's a sword with two edges here, because on the one hand, there's no doubt that there's enormous stuff that has been of great value to us that's come through that tradition. On the other hand, there is a tendency to ignore every other tradition. So up until remarkably recently, there were scholars who claimed that Chinese was an inferior script because it wasn't an abstract alphabet like Greek. And so therefore it couldn't be used for abstract thought. Now, this is, of course, a bone of great contention for the Chinese. And they're kind of going, wait a second, Confucius was writing philosophy when you guys were painting yourselves blue with woad and fighting each other with sticks, you know. So one of the great ambitions of mine through the Atlas of Endangered Alphabets and through my entire Endangered Alphabets project is to take off those kind of cultural blinders and get to the point where we realize that there are multiple ways to convey thought, feeling, intention, and equally, because there are multiple ways, we should look at these other cultures with respect as equals, rather than to say, yes, they're primitive, they're backward, they haven't evolved as much as we have because they're still drawing with pictures, or stuff that people said, you know, in the 19th and even into the 20th century.
And like you said, the blinders and a little bit of ignorance that goes along with it. Now, you mentioned that with that resurgence in the Sudanese language, Sundanese. I'll get it right before we're finished here. That there was a Wikipedia page and there was, you know, some you know, references on the internet. Is that a way of sort of solidifying in our world now, you know, sort of giving it that extra, you know, position and recognition? Somebody can find it on Wikipedia.
Absolutely, yes. And I'm actually collaborating with some people from the Wikimedia Foundation, so as to not only be able to make all of this information that I've gathered in the last 15 years, only a small portion of which is in this book.
That's crazy.
Not only to make that available free of charge, you know, to everybody, but also to make it available free of charge in multiple languages. So, you know, my great one of my many weaknesses is that the stuff that I turn out is in English, you know, and it's like the language of the conquerors again. And so when I see, for example, a Wikipedia page in Breton or in Catalan or in a different script altogether, such as Sundanese, not only is that a great sign that people in that culture are sort of taking their cause forward, it's also an opportunity to learn. So much of the stuff that I've learned has been from 1, 2, 3, 4 informants in a particular place.
I love it.
And I am constantly expecting every day to be told, oh, by the way, that is only partly true, or that's not true at all, or whatever. The person who told you that doesn't really represent our culture, etc. So that kind of grassroots revival and digital manifestation together, very important.
Building the groundswell,
absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
But there's another piece to this, which is going to be the subject of my next book, which is that it's amazing how many of these resurgent cultures are carrying out this act of kind of cultural renewal by teaching calligraphy in their traditional script.
Nice. Oh, that's nice. And I mean, your carvings as well. Now, just to spin around a little bit and
Yeah.
then, add on to the internet discussion. I believe there were a section or a language that you talked about, like a keyboard that existed with those characters. Like, I can't remember which ones they were, but that's pretty important as well.
Oh, yes.
Right?
There's a wonderful guy called Craig Cornelius who works for Google. And his particular specialty is taking a digitized script and adapting it for devices. So this means that, well, here's a great example. So you mentioned Berea, which is the script that was based on the brand marks of camels. And so the Berea script is used by the 𝐬𝐫𝐽 people who live on the borders of Sudan and Chad, and it's a desert area. They're very, very much dependent on camels, but it's an area that was overrun by the Arabs, 1400 years ago, and so ever since then they have been regarded as being sort of like inferior Arabs without the gloss of knowledge, civilization, astronomy, writing, all those other wonderful things that, that the Islamic world developed. But it did mean that the 𝐬𝐫𝐽 people were sort of permanent outsiders in terms of, learning and civilization. So when they have when their script is adapted for a device, it means they can actually text each other in their own script without having to go through Arabic. So that's a kind of a revolutionary thing politically when, these people have been dominant over you culturally for centuries. Finally, to be able to say, this is ours. We're talking to each other in our own language, in our own script.
Oh my gosh. See, that sends chills, that, and again, like you said, that's groundbreaking.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing that will move this forward. And you are such a wealth of information. And we talked, we're already at our time, but, hopefully this will become a university course and be part of a curriculum. But before we sign off, I wanted to make sure that we talked about this sale that you have going on.
Yes.
And I've already taken advantage of it. So I want to make sure that we touch on that. I'm going to bring that up here. So you have some items, including the first book that you said, came out, or the second book that came out before the last one. Which one?
Yes, exactly.
Wait.
We have some merchandise. We have some books. Yes, there's Writing Beyond Writing. Yep.
Yeah.
And then we have some carvings as well.
Yes. And I wanted to see if I could show. Oh, there's one. Look how beautiful is that. And this one says, "Thank you all."
In 𝐷𝐶𝐾𝐭, and the 𝐷𝐶𝐾𝐭 script of the Santali language. Yeah, keep scrolling down because there's a couple.
Look how beautiful is that.
Oh, wait till you get to the bottom.
Okay.
Keep going. I mean, these all just
Mongolian script, a poem. Oh my goodness. Okay, where do you want me to?
Yeah, stop there.
Oh, look at that table. Okay, and that's Tibetan calligraphy. Oh my goodness. So those of you who are watching, this is on Tim's website, endangeredalphabets.com, and go to the Indigo Sunday End of the Year and Moving Sale. So I have already purchased my copy of Writing Beyond Writing. And I've also, I'm not going to say what else I've purchased because you just never know whose stocking it might wind up in. So, oh my goodness, Tim, I so appreciate you coming back and sharing a little more insight into this amazing book, The Atlas of Endangered Alphabets. And as I said, this is going to stay on my coffee table for a good long time. And you're working on another one. Yep. So I hope you'll come back.
I hope so too.
it just goes so fast. So I can't believe it. So thank you again. And good luck with your sale.
Thank you. And yes, it's badly needed, but yes. So thanks so much for inviting me, and thanks for being such a long time encourager and supporter.
Oh, absolutely, my pleasure. I think it's extremely important research and work. So I applaud you for your commitment. My goodness, and sticking to it. So we will see you again soon.
I hope so. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And thank you all for joining us on the author journey this week. I'm Ann O'Connell with OC Publishing, and I hope you're doing lots of great reading and writing. And we'll see you again soon on the author journey. Bye for now.